The most common real estate transactions start with a seller deciding to sell their home and a buyer deciding to buy a home. They each typically hire a professional real estate agent to help them with the negotiations, terms, and overall transaction. Here's how that process traditionally goes. The buyer finds a property they want to purchase, and they have their agent, also called the buyer's agent, submit an offer to the seller through the listing agent. The listing agent reviews the offer and submits it directly to the seller. Negotiations now take place like the final purchase price, the deposit amount, the close date, and when the inspections, appraisal, and loan approval should be completed by. These negotiations, depending on numerous factors, can be both frustrating and stressful for all parties involved. Once the seller and buyer agree, they are now what we call under contract. The negotiations have been completed, and each party is now responsible for moving the transaction forward. One of the first responsibilities the buyer has is to schedule and perform a general property inspection with a qualified inspector. Depending on the overall condition of the property and the discovery from the inspector, the buyer may have more inspections completed. Examples of those additional inspections include a roof, foundation, sewer, chimney, and more. While the buyer is performing their inspections, the seller should be providing the buyer with all of the required property disclosures. This is the opportunity that the seller has to let the buyer know any and all known conditions, any past repairs made, or any past insurance claims, any facts that might be important to the buyer. Within the inspection timeline that was originally negotiated, the buyer will review all inspection reports, any cost estimates for repairs, and any disclosures the seller has provided. This is probably the most critical step in a real estate transaction. There is now a high probability that the buyer has discovered things about the property that they didn't know about while they made and negotiated their initial offer to purchase. Now, if you are the buyer, and after careful review of the inspections and disclosures, you have a few choices. You can ask the seller to make repairs, you can ask the seller for credits or concessions, you can ask the seller for a price reduction, or you can just ask for all of the above. This is the buyer renegotiation phase. At this point, the buyer could feel like they overpaid, feel like things were hidden or not properly disclosed. They could also lack trust in their agent and the selling side. Now, if you're the seller, you have some things to consider as well. And depending on what the buyer is asking for, you may agree to all of the requests, agree to some of the requests, or maybe you just say no to any of the requests. This is the seller renegotiation phase. The seller could feel there is a false sense of value about their property, maybe feel taken advantage of, and possibly not get the same price for their home that they originally went under contract at. These renegotiations during this phase can be frustrating for all parties. This can lead to contract extensions and delays, cause issues with the lender, and more importantly, prevent a great customer experience. Worst case scenario, if the seller doesn't agree with any of the requests, the buyer can just walk away. The seller may now have to go back on the market and will have to disclose to the next buyer everything that was discovered with the previous buyer anyway. In addition, the seller might not get the same price they were under contract at initially. They may have to do repairs that they aren't prepared to do, and now may have to make alternate plans because they no longer have a buyer for their home. For the buyer who walks away, they have paid money out of pocket for inspections that they won't get back. They have to go find another property, and they may have to make alternate plans as well because they are no longer under contract. This old and traditional way of conducting a real estate transaction is no longer favorable for sellers, buyers, or their agents. It creates a tremendous amount of negative emotions, creates more risk and more liability for everyone involved. Here's an example of how a typical and traditional real estate negotiation looks like from a numbers perspective. The seller has a property on the market that was built in 1988, has 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and is approximately 1,467 square feet. The property has been on the market with no offers for 24 days. It's in average condition, and they are asking $399,000. A buyer views the home with their agent, falls in love with it, and has their agent submit an offer to purchase for $385,000. Nothing really unusual with this. After a few days of back and forth negotiations, the buyer and seller agree to a final purchase price of $394,000. the buyer wants the property, and the seller is ready to sell. Just to recap, we had a seller asking $399,000, a buyer who initially offered $385,000, and with numerous back and forth negotiations, they agreed to move forward at $394,000. Once the buyer has reviewed all property inspections and seller disclosures, they typically find things they didn't know about when they agreed to the $394,000 purchase price. This is most likely items tied to the physical condition of the property that might need repairs or maintenance. Common things found on an inspection of a property include electrical, plumbing, heating and cooling, and health and safety issues. So how does a buyer feel after they find a property needs repairs or maintenance? And back to our earlier example, could the buyer feel like they are overpaying? Maybe the buyer doesn't have the means or experience in making repairs. In this example, because of the condition of the property, the buyer has chosen to submit to the seller a request for $6,000 of a price reduction or credit from the seller. At this point, how does the seller feel? Do they feel taken advantage of? Did they know this was coming, and did they price their property accordingly? Remember, the seller was asking $399,000. The buyer's initial offer was $385,000. They negotiated a price of $394,000, and now they are at $388,000. This was a lot of work to get to a place where a buyer and seller could potentially be tired and frustrated. Using the same example as before, let's look at this from the transaction timeline perspective. We spend so much time around money and price, we sometimes forget the pressures put on dates and deadlines. Once a buyer and seller do agree on terms, they finalize their contracts and have what's called a fully executed agreement. Once this happens, the clock starts to tick. The date of acceptance in this scenario we will call day 0. We will also assume that there is a 30-day timeline to close this transaction. You can use any time frame here, but the challenges still remain the same. Aside from a date when the buyer's deposit is due, the most common next deadline is the physical inspection. This time frame is usually between 7 and 12 days for the buyer to have completed, and in this scenario, we said 10 days. The seller is also usually required to provide the buyer with all of the property disclosures, as well as a preliminary title report. For this, we used 12 days. We will also have deadlines for HOA documentation, appraisal, and loan approval. These are all deadlines both the buyer and seller agreed to in the initial contract. So what happens if the title report isn't ordered on time or it's delayed? What if the HOA documents aren't ordered on time or delayed? What happens if you need to spend time renegotiating inspections or repairs? Please remember that these deadlines include time for the buyer to review and approve documentation provided by the seller. What happens if the buyer decides to walk away? I'm sure you can think of additional things that could cause delays and frustrations. There are numerous other things that could cause delays, and this leads to renegotiating the original dates and deadlines. And again, this puts pressure on all parties involved in the transaction, not counting the number of phone calls, emails, text messages, and the signing of additional paperwork. If you think about the traditional process, it's no wonder why we have statistics like these. Over 30% of residential real estate transactions fall out of contract due to the physical condition of the property, primarily because we don't do any inspections or provide disclosures until after we go under contract. The National Association of Realtors reports this number at 28%. Of all the properties that go under contract, over 85% of them have to renegotiate the original terms of the contract, like the repairs, credits, concessions, and price reductions. This also includes the extension of dates and deadlines. Both the buyer and seller get a false sense of value when they are under contract at a certain price in the beginning and then have to renegotiate after inspection. More than 60% of properties that do go under contract also have unnecessary delays due to everything we've discussed so far. And the number one reason a home seller will get sued by the buyer after the property closes escrow is due to non-disclosure. So why did we choose the word verified and not use something like certified or pre-owned? We are definitely not certifying or guaranteeing any real estate. And even though the property might be pre-owned, we are not selling used cars either. The word verify is a verb that means to make sure or demonstrate that something is true, accurate, or justified. Hence the past tense meaning verified. So what makes a property qualify to become verified? Prior to either signing a listing agreement with a seller, or at least prior to actively marketing a property for sale in the MLS, the following items need to be completed. The seller has a general property inspection done on their property by a licensed or certified inspector. This is also sometimes called a pre-inspection. The seller or listing agent will place a seller's transferable home warranty at the time the listing agreement is signed. This type of home warranty can be beneficial during the marketing and escrow period, just in case something on the property breaks. This is great peace of mind. Either the seller can pay for it at close, the buyer can pay for it at close, or it's a great closing gift for the agents. Each state is different in what they call the next item. By ordering a preliminary title report, we are trying to have a good understanding of not just who's on title, but any potential liens or encumbrances we need to have a jump on. This is what can cause delays last minute from the title company. Having the seller complete the state-appropriate seller disclosures is a big part of being transparent early on. These are the minimum requirements for the Verified Property Program. Additional recommendations, and depending on the advice from the pre-inspector, would be to have a roof inspection, foundation inspection, sewer or septic inspection, chimney or fireplace inspection, or a pool and spa inspection. These are just some examples, and it's important to note that these types of inspections should also be done by a licensed contractor that includes a cost of repairs that goes with it. So why are we doing this at the beginning when we take the listing and not after we go under contract? Because we really don't like to renegotiate price, terms, credits, or concessions. We would love to prevent any delays along the way. You can't always prevent them, but you can have more control early on when you work this way. There is a lot less stress and frustration when you verify the property and stick to the program. I'm sure you would really not want to fall out of contract and have to go back onto the market. Oh, and by the way, all of the things we've discussed still have to happen anyway. An important note to remember here: the buyer can still perform their own inspections. The goal is to not get blindsided by anything and to demonstrate confidence in what we are selling. What are some additional benefits of having a property verified? The heavy lifting and the things that need to happen anyway are all done at the beginning. This will free you up to do other real estate business while you are under contract. This is an amazing way to qualify the motivation from the seller as well as the buyer. And what I mean by that is this: if they don't see the value in doing it, my experience has shown me that they really aren't motivated to do the things necessary to close a transaction. The initial cost to verify a property up front does far outweigh the potential cost of repairs, credits, price reductions, or concessions a seller could pay. There is absolutely less risk and liability for the seller and brokerage. Why? Everything was disclosed up front, and there's a home warranty in place. Your broker and E&O provider will love you for it. You can sell with more confidence and assurance. What does confidence mean? It's the state of feeling certain about the truth of something. And what does assurance mean? It means confidence or certainty in one's own abilities. More importantly, you get to be a part of an amazing movement we are creating, including a better standard of doing real estate. Who pays for the property to get verified? Let's start with the pre-inspection. The first choice and preferred method is to have the seller pay for the inspection at the time of completion. The goal is to have the seller see the value and have some skin in the game. The second option is dependent on how the agent runs their business model. Sometimes this is part of what the listing agent includes in their listing fee. Sometimes the seller doesn't have the means to pay for it themselves. And sometimes the listing agent pays for things up front. The third option is the seller agrees to pay it, but they would prefer to pay it at the close and out of their net proceeds. Please make sure your inspector agrees to this option. The final option, and worst case scenario, is that the inspector doesn't get paid at all. The average cost of a pre-inspection is around $400, with the average request for a credit or repairs from a seller at $6,000. Which scenario do you think is better for the seller? Additional requirements to get a property verified is to include a seller's transferable home warranty. Most home warranty companies have a plan that can be applied to a property during the marketing of a home for sale. They also will place the home warranty on the property without taking payment until the property closes. Ask your favorite home warranty company for details. You should also have your favorite title company run a preliminary title report prior to placing a home for sale on the market. Some states call this an O&E report or Owners and Encumbrances report. The goal here is to not only verify who is on title, but to make sure there are no surprise liens on the property that need to be taken care of prior to close. You'd be surprised how many times an escrow can get delayed because an agent waits too long to order a title report and they find things that need to be corrected. Depending on your state and depending on your broker requirements, we encourage the sellers complete the required property disclosures prior to accepting an offer. Again, why do we want to wait till after we're under contract to know all the facts? To make things easier and clear, we are including for you a verified participation and payment agreement to use for each transaction. This will help make it clear who is responsible for paying for the pre-inspection. Please check with your broker prior to use. Step number 1 is to complete the minimum requirements for the verified program prior to a property going live or active in the local MLS. Remember, this includes a general property inspection and report with any additional inspections, including any estimates for repair. Have the seller complete the required seller's property disclosures. Order a preliminary title report or comparable for your state. Include a seller's transferable home warranty. Once these items are completed, the property is now verified. In step number 2, the listing agent now goes live or active in the MLS. It is important to include the inspection report, additional inspections, seller's disclosures, and a copy of the home warranty in a pre-offer or offer submission instructions section in your MLS. Sometimes this is also known as the supplements or attachments section. In the agent private remarks section of the MLS listing, we recommend using this language to help buyer's agents understand the next steps. This property has been verified, and the pre-inspections, any reports, and disclosures are attached in the listing for your buyers to review prior to submitting their offer. Some agents already have pre-offer instructions, so this is an easy step to add. But as you probably already know, not every agent reads the private remarks or follows instructions very well. In scenario A, the buyer submits their offer to the listing agent prior to receiving the pre-offer package. In step number 2, it's important to recognize that the buyer's agent didn't read the private agent remarks and submitted their buyer's offer without the pre-offer package. So in this scenario, it's important for the listing agent to send the buyer's agent the pre-offer package and respectfully say, "We appreciate you submitting your buyer's offer to purchase, but before we submit that offer to the seller, we are asking you and your buyer review the pre-offer package as outlined in the MLS private agent remarks. You still have an opportunity to resubmit your offer according to the current condition of the property." Remember, the goal here is to help the buyer get a better idea of the condition of the property, which is why we encourage them writing a new offer or revising their current offer so that we are not renegotiating after we go under contract. We can still encourage that the buyer perform their own inspection, and it's probably wise to do so. The buyer has a choice. They can walk, or they can revise their original offer. Believe it or not, it could be a better option for the buyer to walk now rather than later. This is a really good way to qualify how bad a buyer wants the property, as mentioned before. If the buyer chooses to submit an offer, you are now in a better position to counter the offer and clean up the terms. An example is language like, "Seller will not offer any credits, repairs, warranties, or price reductions." This is one of the best ways to avoid renegotiations while avoiding the risk and potential liability that comes with non-disclosure. This actually ensures you're dealing with the right buyer and seller because they see the value in the process. Your transactions will be more efficient and would be considered a more true as-is sale. In scenario B, the buyer's agent did read the private agent remarks prior to writing their offer. They downloaded it directly from the MLS or requested it directly from the listing agent and reviewed it with their buyer. After review of the pre-offer package, the buyer can choose to walk away now with no harm, with no offer presented, with nothing negotiated, and the seller not having to worry about going back onto the market like so many properties do. Or the buyer can submit a better offer knowing the condition of the property, and just like the previous scenario, you are now in a better position to counter the offer and clean up the terms. And again, this is one of the best ways to avoid renegotiations while avoiding the risk and potential liability that comes with non-disclosure. This actually ensures you're dealing with the right buyer and seller because they see the value in the process. Your transactions will be more efficient and would be considered a more true as-is sale. Remember this example from earlier? Had this property been verified, the frustration that can happen with back and forth negotiations could have been avoided. The chances the buyer actually writes a more appropriate offer based on condition would increase significantly. More importantly, would the seller have chosen to price their property accordingly? It all begins with a new and better way to conduct a real estate transaction. With the verified system, you'll be able to bring more value to your clients and brokerage. Get the heavy lifting out of the way, better qualify your sellers and your buyers, and get the time back you need to grow your real estate business. Becoming a verified member not only provides you with a better real estate skill set, it helps you demonstrate your level of professionalism and credibility to be the fiduciary you are expected to be. We are so confident in this system, and through strategic beta testing, we are including a complete marketing kit for you to lead generate and nurture with. Your verified membership includes the right to use the verified brand, along with a ton of marketing and lead generating materials. The marketing kit includes some amazing content, such as 30 social media posts with social media copy and hashtags written for you, social media videos, customizable flyers and brochures, seller presentation slides, sign writer templates, video marketing scripts, texting scripts, blog post, and an email template, just to name a few. In addition, you'll receive some great explainer scripts, counteroffer terms, as well as MLS private agent remarks. Everything you need to find success with the verified selling system. We want to help you build more confidence, create more conversations, and get excited about a better way to do real estate. So sign up today to become a verified agent.